Hello, dear participants, Honorable Speaker, Mr. Ranzans, my colleague and chair of the Commission. Thank you to everyone for support, in particular to Dalna for organizing this exchange of ideas. I hope this will not be the last such time, and it is also not the first, because we met first when we started working in the 13th Saima. It was on the 9th of December, Anti-Corruption Day, during a seminar organized by the Anti-Corruption Committee. We held it together with Delna, and this was the first time when several parties committed to focus on lobbying transparency framework. So when we started our political career, it was clear that it had to be done, but things do not always work out. But I'm happy to report that during this mandate, several political groups, parties joined their forces, and currently all 7 political groups are represented in our working group and are driving this draft law forward. When we started our work, we had to understand what are the problems we have to solve, like in any other case, like with any other draft law, and whether we can claim that if we prepare this law, that things will really change. 10 years ago, as a good governance expert, I was quite skeptical because I saw examples from other countries where the law was adopted, but they did not work that well. For example, like in our neighboring country, Lithuania. And today we will be able to listen to a presentation about Lithuanian experience. But more and more political international experts claim that we had to do that, but we had to understand what are the decisions that we have to make during the current mandate. So we had to review this matter completely. Of course, demand for this law was inexistent and it was quite obvious. Before the 13th Saima as well as during the current Saima, because the processes are not transparent. For example, we all remember what happened when people realized that a waste management monopoly agreement was signed for 20 years in Riga. Everyone was looking at each other in disbelief. How could that happen? How could these decisions could be made? We could just guess. We have also seen in Saima that interests that are behind specific decisions, specific amendments proposed by MPs are not really clear. So what can we do? We asked this question to ourselves. We were also helped by the third factor. We analyzed why things didn't work out. The director of the State Chancery already mentioned that 10 years ago there was an attempt to adopt such a framework, but it was a failed attempt. Maybe we lacked international and internal incentive to do that, but now the situation has changed. Thus, we could conclude that we could proceed safely forward because we were provided by a survey, a report by the analytical service of our Saima. So we had this data, and we also could learn from experiences of other countries, and thank you to them. And these analytical data really helped us, and I would recommend to all the lawmakers to use such analytical grounds so that people cannot just come and say, we have this framework in Europe, let us take it over. You have to analyze situation in specific countries, you have to take over the best practices, You cannot just copy paste. You have to learn. You have to decide what will be the best for you. Second, during the previous attempt, the law was not adopted because there was an opposition between the Saima and the law. The draft law was prepared by the Anti-Corruption Office, and at that time I was participating as a representative of an NGO, and I saw that there was certain opposition. Maybe there was not enough political will, but partially that could be attributed to legitimate questions, like what are the relations between the executive and legislative powers. This time we have solved this problem, and we believe that the lobbying transparency law is something that should be done under the guidance of the legislator, of course, together with all the other stakeholders. The second thing that was quite problematic was that NGOs fought with business organizations, business associations. Basically, they could not decide, could not agree who is a lobbyist and who is not, and who is a party representing certain interests. So eventually, this ended up being a fight on commas and dots, and the draft law was sent back to the parliament, and eventually it just disappeared from the agenda. So this is a history that we received, that we analyzed, and we have spent several months on that, maybe missing a few months due to COVID pandemics, when we had to focus on COVID-related laws. But now we have agreed about the basic principles that will be discussed after the new year with the public and other stakeholders. So, what do we want to achieve? We want to look at the representation of interests from a wider point of view. We want to substitute the word lobbying that has some negative connotations in Latvia. So, this is the baggage that this word carries with it. Lobbying in people's minds is related to something maybe not transparent, maybe representation of very narrow interests. We want to change not only the law, the legal framework, we also want to change how we approach such activities in Latvia. It cannot be just a privilege of big money or whom you know. We want to define this representation as an inseparable part of the democracy, and we want to apply it to all important decisions and adoption of laws. So how can we ensure that transparency? And at the same time, a lack of over-regulation. Our partners have warned us about these dangers by our business partners, by other partners, and we are quite aware of that because we don't want to become a thought police in a free and democratic state. Thus, we will focus on the legislative process and what higher state officials do. Of course, in cooperation with various representatives of certain interests. And we want to allocate the burden on reporting these interests, and a great part will be entrusted to the legislator, to the public officials, to the public bodies. For example, with regards to fora where these interests are already represented, we don't want to radically change the current situation. We want to make it more open and transparent. We have discussed standards and the code of ethics. For example, what this representation would mean for private individuals, for businesses, and so on. The register of companies is ready to cooperate to create the register. And we have decided in our group that this register has to be mandatory and open. As it was already indicated by the open government partnership representative. Thus, it seems that we go hand in hand with the international standards that are currently applicable in 2020, we definitely will not be able to succeed to implement the visions that we see if these data are not in the open formats, if they are not easily searchable. So when, for example, data set on specific law is opened, this data set should include all the activities that could affect the content of the law. Of course, we read this law as a preventive law for honest people because dishonest conduct will be criminally punishable. Yes, we have also discussed what penalties should apply, but we will continue this discussion when we know what duties and obligations each party will have in this overall system. We have simulated this system on the basis of what the SAIMA and the government does. These processes are interrelated because most draft laws come from the government and sometimes the parliament sends them back to the government. But we also see that the same will have to apply on municipal level. As of the next year, we will have fewer local governments in Latvia, namely 42, which is 3 times less than before. And we hope that on the local government level, the lobbying law will also operate because this is where the democracy will be brought to life because everyone's opinions will be heard and decision makers will have to balance these interests for the benefit of the society, both in the government and also in the parliament. So we have achieved a certain progress in our working group. We have worked together with NGOs, with business organizations, state administration, and we are very focused on continuing this inclusive process so that our lobbyists, those who represent certain interests, would face a process that is as transparent as possible. This is a kind of environment that we want to create for any and all legislative activities. So we want to set an example. So as it was said, at the beginning of the next year, we'll have a public consultation, and then we'll start drafting the law, as Mr. Ronsons already mentioned. And we hope that during 2021 we will be able to demonstrate to the public what the political will means. While we work with this draft law, we see that political will is existent. People want to invest effort, their work, their knowledge to ensure that we have a completely new regulation, a meaningful legal framework so that we can be sure that during our mandate we not only undertook this work but will also complete it. And it will not be possible if all of you, as well as many other parties, do not get involved and do not support us, because we need all minds, we need all opinions to make sure that this exercise is as meaningful as possible. And that applies to local and international partners. Thank you for this discussion, and I hope that we will meet in a year and will be able to discuss great progress and plan how to ensure that this law is meaningfully introduced. Thank you.